Okay, cool. You ready to go?
Yep.
Grand. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Williams, and I am an Access Fellow at Jesus College in Oxford. I'm also a politics tutor, and I'm here with
Daniel, hi. I'm doing PPE on the foundation here.
Absolutely right. So Daniel's on the foundation year at Lady Margaret Hall, one of the other Oxford colleges. I will be putting lots of details about the foundation year in the description below. It's a fantastic scheme designed to help people who, through no fault of their own, have been historically underrepresented at Oxford. So do please check it out if you think it would be useful for you. Right, Daniel, today we're going to be talking in this Oxford tutorial about the essay plans that you wrote for me. So I will put them up on my screen so that we can take a look and you can talk me through them. So thank you, first of all, for sending these through. Just
Cool.
give me a bit of a sense of how you found the process of writing these. Just tell me whether you enjoyed it, whether you found it difficult, stressful. Just tell me in your own words how you found it.
I found some easier than others, and I think that's partly to do with I did every single question in one like paper, if that makes sense. So I think I did all the 2015 questions, and I know I wouldn't have chosen certain questions. So I think my plan one is the first one I would have chosen, and then the last one was the last one I would have chosen.
Okay, so can you talk me through why you prefer some questions to others? Is it a bit of a gut feeling, or is there something more to it than that, do you think?
Yeah, well, I would say the last question in particular is quite difficult in that there's two kind of arguments that you need to contend with, and with the first one, even though it has two parts, encourage or discourage, to me it makes a little bit more sense because there's a kind of a spectrum and you can find a bit more nuance with it.
Right. So the last question was this one, right? If inward migration is bad for a country, does it follow that outward migration would be good for that country? And you're right. You're being asked to assess at least three claims. So whether or not inward migration is bad, whether or not outward migration is good, and whether or not there's some sort of connection between the two or a disconnection. So that's quite a lot to do in 30 minutes. So I agree that's a tough one. But remember what we said in our last tutorial, that you shouldn't necessarily shrink from difficult questions, because it could be that those are the ones that fewer people attempt, and therefore will be more of an opportunity to show off your thinking skills.
Cool.
Not to say that you weren't showing off your thinking skills in the other. So let's start with this first one. Should whistleblowers be encouraged or discouraged? So as ever, start by deconstructing the question. Just tell me what words in that question spring out to you as interesting, as ambiguous, as in need of being honed down a little bit.
Well, I guess should, encouraged, and discouraged. I guess whistleblowers is pretty self-explanatory in that we don't really it's good to define, but we don't need to make it a hook word.
Sure, yeah, exactly. I mean, you could spend the whole essay just defining the terms, which would be a bit of a waste, and you wouldn't actually answer the question. But you're right, good. So the hook words here are should and encouraged or discouraged. So that would be a good way to structure your response. In other words, if your answer is yes, they should be encouraged, then you should explain what that notion of should means. There's some other interesting things with regard to the subject of this sentence. I don't know how much formal grammar have you done. Have you studied a language at all?
Well, I did French at GCSE, so
okay,
I've completely forgotten all of it. So
right, it's all right. Don't worry. This is not a language test, but just the key point is that there isn't an explicitly stated subject of this sentence, and you can tell that because the verbs are in the passive form. So imagine the sentence was, I should encourage whistleblowers. I would be the subject of the sentence. Encourage would be the verb, and the object is whistleblower. But in this sentence, the subject has been omitted. So it's using the passive form. So should whistleblowers be encouraged or discouraged? It begs the question, by whom? By whom are they going to be encouraged or discouraged? Or by what process, by what mechanism? And whenever you see the use of the passive form of the verb, that gives you an opportunity to beg that extra question. Who is doing the encouragement or discouragement? If they're being encouraged by some sort of enormous financial incentive, it might encourage a bit more lying and mendacity from our whistleblowers. If they're being encouraged by statements that they won't be prosecuted or they'll be somehow protected, then that might be a slightly more benign mechanism. Do you see what I'm getting at? So it's a good idea to notice what is in the question, but also what's missing, because that could be significant. Okay, anyway, so talk me through should. What sort of elements of should could we consider for the encouragement or discouragement of whistleblowers?
Also, like the arguments for and against.
Oh, well, just how you are even defining should in this context. So we're still sort of on the linguistic side of things.
Yeah, I always find should kind of difficult because it's in every single question. So nearly every single question. So how are you how are you trying to find a different response to it? So because I don't want to write the same, even though I know the examiner hasn't seen every single essay, I feel like in my own writing it might get more mundane.
Okay, but that's fine. I mean, do trust yourself. So start off with how you define should, and then we'll talk through some other possibilities that you might not have thought of.
Whether we agree if society should accept it. Well, you can't say should, so needs to accept it.
Okay, so should in the sense that society needs to find out. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So should in the sense that it's useful, it's efficacious. So that's absolutely excellent, right? So when we talk about should, I mean the most basic split is between should because it's moral and should because it is efficient or effective. And that in sort of philosophical terms is the distinction between should in a deontological sense and should in a consequentialist sense. Should we do it because it's the right thing to do, it makes us better people, it makes for a more just, fair society, versus should we do it because it just improves business, it improves transparency, it'll lead to better outcomes in the end. Both aspects of should, you could say, are absolutely valid. And that could have provided a slightly easier structure to go through if you talk about should because it's morally correct, should because it leads to better outcomes, but then should not. And then you had this terrific point. I really liked your final sort of caveat, which is that you should discourage whistleblowers. Why did you say that?
That we should discourage.
Yeah, so you in your point here.
Okay, cool. Oh, yeah, the counter argument.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So it was quite interesting because you could also argue if there's constant whistleblowers, and so the more whistleblowers there are, the more likely it is that the reliability of these claims are going to be, I guess, not as reliable. So I thought if there's constant claims, it would just damage these institutions in the fact that they wouldn't be able to get on with business. They're just like doing damage control all the time.
Absolutely terrific. And that gets you into the weeds of what it means to have a whistleblower. So although you're right that you don't necessarily want to spend too much of the essay defining your terms, the notion of whistleblowing implies a non-institutional mechanism for giving information. In other words, someone has to sort of blow a whistle in a slightly informal context in order to show up some problem in a business or a government organization or what have you. So if we imagine without
also with the reliability of the claims, I guess the more they are, the less severe they would, like the severity of the claim would be. So it wouldn't, like if you had one whistleblower in, let's just say, a government, it might be massive, but if you have loads, it might just be little issues. And with one whistleblower, people are more likely to listen.
Right, exactly. I mean, let's just think in a context that's closer to home. Let's say that the colleges at Oxford are currently trying to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's say that the first time we found out that some of our students were in accommodation and they weren't getting access to good food, the first time we found out was because someone blew a whistle and told the press. Surely we would be really devastated that they hadn't come to us first. They didn't think there was a mechanism for communicating that usual chat. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
So it's not to say you should discourage the whistleblowers per se, but the fact that whistleblowing is even necessary suggests that your institutions are utterly broken. You can't speak to people and get information from them that you need without them feeling they have to go behind your back. So I thought, exactly as you say, it could damage institutions if you encourage people to go outside of the normal mechanisms to complain rather than doing it within the structure.
Yeah, and I guess it would damage institutions in the sense that it's kind of blackmail because by going outside of the spectrum, especially with social media now, it's instantaneous. As in the past, when you had a press, you kind of had a barrier between speech and between public speech and your own opinions. I guess now it's just instantaneous and it doesn't need, it is no filter.
Yeah, good. So that's a really strong caveat to your case. So how are you going
Yeah, it is.
at that point to really sort of damage your overall case, which is no, we should encourage, or sorry, whistleblowers should be encouraged. How do you bring it back from the edge, as it were?
Yeah, so the reason why I think that so my opinion was that all whistleblowers should be encouraged in the fact that if we discourage some, because there's like a spectrum of truth as well. How do people believe in what they believe, and do they think what they think is true? So like it's different for everyone. So if we discourage one, we might be um absolving some crimes because a certain person believed that their truth wasn't whistleblowery enough.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess it also makes society more responsible in that if we don't have things that hold us to account, we can become corrupt essentially. And the fact that we do rely on each other to make society a better place allows certain people whose decisions might be negative to think about changing their opinions.
Yeah, good. Now, you use the case of Edward Snowden. You don't need to demonstrate knowledge of that particular case, but it could be a really helpful illustration. So could you just talk me through where your thought process was going there by using Edward Snowden to justify encouraging whistleblowing?
Yes, because I guess it precisely showed, yeah, so the Edward case, which was facilitated through my principal, Alan Rusbridger.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I thought the case just shows in itself the inherent value of a whistleblower. Even if if there's 100 whistleblowers and 99 of them are not Edward Snowden, the one that is Edward Snowden makes every single whistleblower worth it because he precisely showed the problems within our society and the fact that he's been discouraged for so long afterwards. I think it demonstrates even more why we should do it.
Right, absolutely. But his case is really fascinating when we go back to that question I had about who's doing the encouragement, who's doing the discouraging.
Yeah.
Because he was encouraged by some people, including, as you say, prominent members of the media. But he was, of course, very heavily pressurized not to so by other groups, especially the National Security Agency. So how would you weigh up the encouragement versus the discouragement that he might have faced?
Well, there's also like a distinction between at what point. So as we know now, he's faced a lot of discouragement, but also a bubbling encouragement as well that's building up. So I would say it's been a lot of discouragement, and perhaps that's a good thing because if there wasn't a lot of discouragement, would he have really made a difference, or what he said really pierced through society?
So if we can distill out a principle that is demonstrated by the Snowden case, what do you think that principle is when it comes to whistleblowing? Did he help us in terms of elevating the morality of the American security infrastructure? Did he help improve the outcomes of American intelligence gathering? What is it that through encouraging his whistleblowing has improved?
It made the national security more accountable for their actions.
Right.
They realized they couldn't just go off their own accord. So without that, perhaps people's liberties would have been at risk.
Good. So in terms of the structure of the essay, it seems to have achieved two goals that might be of value, both a deontological, it's enhanced the accountability of a government agency, which is good in its own terms, but also it's had an instrumental or consequential effect insofar as, in theory, future actions of the NSA will be taken more tentatively because they're worried that there might be another Edward Snowden or is it Chelsea Manning or another sort of person who could again tell on the US government effectively. Okay, terrific. For your second point, you say that if it was discouraged, the truth wouldn't get out. Oof, what's the truth? Who holds the truth? Do whistleblowers know the truth?
So I think I referred to this before. If it was discouraged, some truth wouldn't. So some form of truth wouldn't get out, and even if one sense of the truth is discouraged, I guess all of it is, because that one small piece could affect everyone's perspective.
Yeah, good. I think that's a really interesting nuance, that it's a portion of the truth, because organizations are often run in quite an authoritarian manner. Even in democracies, there will be chief executives and a board of executives, and they will rule the business or the government agency as if they are a mini dictatorship. And so the truth that emerges out of the organization tends to be their truth, the truth of the people of power, not the people who are at the bottom of the pyramids. And so by encouraging whistleblowing, you're enabling an outlet which could have a multitude of benefits. It could improve just the general sense that that business is in fact accountable to rules of law and basic expectations of morality. And also it could just improve that business's performance. Sometimes the bosses want to keep something hidden because it's embarrassing, because it might affect their market share, but ultimately what they're doing is actually against their own best interests, and they ought to be listening to this whistleblower. So that notion of truth, I think, is really interesting. But again, you could be writing books on that. So half hour essays is not necessarily easy. But that's really good. But can you see how we've perhaps slightly more clearly utilized the word in order to structure the various points? How might you order your paragraphs in order to try and help your readers understand the progression of your arguments?
Yes, so I agree with the two forms of should. So I probably would have I would have probably gone with the moral point and then a consequential point, then gone with my counter argument and then the conclusion.
Good. I think that makes a lot of sense, because then you're saying they should be encouraged because it's just right in its own self. They should be encouraged because it'll lead to better outcomes. So that seems to be a logical progression of, just do it because it's right, do it because it'll be better in the long run, and then dealing with some caveats, some pretty major caveats, which are quite convincing, but you're not going to let that take you off the general point, which is that on balance, ultimately, they should be encouraged. Good. Okay. Terrific. So let's go to plan number 2. Would society be better if there were more scientists in positions of political power? Oh, there's so much going on in this question.
Yeah, precisely.
Help us start. What sort of words are springing out to you?
Would better.
Good.
There's quite a lot more. So that implies that there isn't enough, I guess, and political power.
And what's the hook word in this question? What's going to help you structure your essay response, do you think?
Yeah, so the way that I do it is just put in a direct question. So society would be better. So I guess would and better, the hook words.
Good, absolutely. So if you were to structure your points according to better, you could break down better into subunits, just as in the last essay we broke down should into subunits. That would be a very helpful way to break it down. So what sort of elements of better, of making society better, could be worth considering? Better in what sense?
Yeah, I guess that's the question of what is society, and because if you need to make something better, you need to know what it is and have like a set of principles.
But we can start with fairly simple. You know, would it make society richer? Would it make society fairer? Would it make society more just? I mean, I guess that's not simple, but are there any other sort of senses of better that we commonly talk about with regard to?
Yeah, so I kind of considered it in social, political, and economic.
Okay.
So yes, so I thought that perhaps it could be better in the social sense, but that would be compounded by the fact that it would conversely be negative in the economic and political sense.
Okay, great. And so so have you ordered them in that way, social, political, economic?
Yes.
Okay.
In a way, but it probably wasn't as direct as it should have been. So I haven't said social, political, economic, but that was the kind of principles where
I think that sounds really nice and clear, and it looks to me what's sometimes described as a funnel design essay structure. Have you ever heard of that?
Nope.
No, that's fine. Don't worry. So a funnel. Imagine a funnel where you're trying to collect water or something.
Oh, cool.
You start at the widest point and you taper into the narrowest point. Social, I would argue, is everything about society. So would society be better? Well, would it be better in the sense that, I don't know, the social components of it, the things that tie us together, things like how we identify each other, how we sort of even claim to be part of a singular society, is pretty much the most macro of all considerations. Then political is a sort of subset of the social, you could argue. It's the bit to do with society that pertains to power. And then the economic is even more narrow than that. It's the bits of power that pertain to relative wealth. And so you've gone wide to narrow, which I think is a very sensible way of doing things, because you make it more and more specific as you go through. So that might be worth pointing out when you set out a roadmap in your introduction. Just sort of say one sentence, I'm going to go through better in terms of social, political, and economic, because that funnels in from the widest to the narrowest perspective, something like that.
Yeah, cool.
Okay. Now, I really liked how you defined scientist, because that's not as straightforward as we might hope it was. So
yeah, I think that took a lot longer than I actually anticipated.
So explain, what did you think? So individuals who focus on hypothesis following data, etc. So tell me through what is a scientist? How do you know if a scientist has just slapped you around the face? Hoping that won't happen.
I guess I just purely use it from all the chemists and biologists that I've been interacting with. I guess that's the kind of thought process I see, especially with now a lot of scientists are going into politics, and a lot of like physics students are being used. So I thought a lot of, I guess, they're less ideological in a sense, in terms of they follow it, they have a point, they have the evidence to back or discourage the point, and then they just simply use their own judgment, which is not affected by as many biases as a politician would have.
Great. Now, we could delve into the philosophy of science, but I'll leave that to the philosophers to do. I mean, one thing they might say is that the very claim that you are non-ideological is itself ideological.
Yeah, I guess, oh, fair play, but I guess less ideological in comparison.
It's fine. I mean, again, we could massively explode the complexity of this. Probably not a great idea, but I think one of the things to emphasize is that I would encourage you not just to look on scientist as synonymous with natural scientist, because I would contend, for example, that you are doing a science degree.
A political science, yes.
Yeah, you're not sure?
To be fair, I would say PP is kind of abstract in the sense that I don't think we should consider it as a science or humanities. It's in its own special subsect because it's that good.
Well, I'll take that. But Einstein put it really nicely, where he said that scientists just refine common sense. That's the scientific method. So it doesn't have to be about natural phenomena. It doesn't have to be about chemicals and atoms and bodies.
That's true.
It's just about taking a problem about the universe and thinking about it systematically, drawing hypotheses and testing those rigorously. It's fair to say that social sciences don't obtain the same degree of predictive power as natural sciences, but the basic bottom line is that nothing gives us access to the truth as far as academia is aware. So the scientists might think that, natural scientists might think that they're a bit less ignorant than we are, but you're splitting hairs, isn't it? So if we were to sort of redefine the question, in other words, keep exactly the same question, but substitute some words in and out in order to clarify it, which is a good tip, by the way. We're sort of saying, for example, would society be richer, just as an example, if there were more people capable of systematically analyzing data in positions of political power? And now we've got a bit of a clearer causal mechanism that you develop more money if you have people that think in a more systematic and rigorous way, would be one sort of causal claim that we could interrogate.
Cool.
Do you see? So what skills do scientists perhaps lack that politicians may have? Why don't we systematically?
Yeah, so I consider this in the conclusion. So I thought that even though the scientists might improve certain areas such as health, so they might dramatically increase our health kind of operating system, but then kind of decrease our economic stability, our political stability. So all in all, it kind of evens out. But the fact that it isn't as it is, which is like a kind of steady state, is more negative then, because you have a lot of instability.
So why would scientists not encourage greater, economic and political performance?
Well, with economic, the kind of problem is there's too much uncertainty and abstract kind of quantities. So it'd be very difficult for scientists to do what they do when they're using natural science. Perhaps social scientists would find it a little bit easier, but economics is a kind of social science.
Well,
but I might be castrated by my fingers for that. But.
No, I think that's a strong point. So economics is sometimes slightly cheekily described as the dismal science because it is difficult to obtain very strong predictive power. And there's a famous quote that if you laid all of the economists in the world end to end, they wouldn't reach a conclusion, because so many of the questions and puzzles they're confronted with do indeterminate outcomes. And also a considerable chunk of economics is human psychology, behavioral psychology. It's all very well being a master of the neoclassical models of economics, but a lot of economics comes down to, how do people feel? Do they feel confident? You could Boris Johnson could encourage a run on the banks this afternoon if he just went to the podium in Downing Street and just started sobbing. Did nothing else, but he just cried. Everyone would freak out. They'd all start pulling their money out of the banks, and the pound would tumble, because there's a huge amount of just feel good about economics. And it's not enough necessarily to know how economies work. You need to be able to convince people that it's working. There's this huge element of just performance, which can't.
Yeah, and I guess having economists in that sense that they've studied for this exact task makes it more reassuring.
Right, and there are tons of economists in the Treasury, extraordinarily bright people. I've taught a few of them myself, and I would trust them with my investments. But I'm not sure I would trust them going out into a podium in Downing Street and saying to everyone, we're going to be fine, and get them geeing everyone up a little bit, because that takes skill. That is performance, which is one of the main reasons we hire politicians. It's often a bit of a mystery to some people. Why isn't the health secretary a doctor? Why isn't the education secretary a teacher? Why isn't, the agriculture secretary a farmer? Actually, he is right now, but let's leave that example. But a lot of the time, there doesn't seem to be a conjunction between the portfolio and the experiences of the individual. But then that suggests that experience isn't really relevant in many cases. You don't elect someone just because they're experienced. You elect them because they have the skills to be a good politician, which are often undervalued in democracies. I mean, what makes for a really skillful politician to your mind? What sort of skill set do you? It's tricky, isn't
it? I guess it depends in what political system. So a autocracy, a democracy, sure. A communist state. I guess they all have different skills needed, but I guess the one that ties every single one together is an ability to attract a wide base of support, as large as it can be, or I guess like a base that is extremely passionate about the said politician.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, so I'm not suggesting that Donald Trump is in any sense of the word a scientist, but he ran on his experience, right? He said, I've done deals, I'm fabulously wealthy, I'm a successful businessman, and government needs to be run like a business. And this is that sort of refrain has been doing the rounds since there's been government and business, pretty much. There's always been someone who says, oh, you know what? Everything would be better if we got rid of all the politicians and we replaced them with experts. Plato said that thousands of years ago. Get rid of politicians because all they're going to do is to try and sell you this false reality. But that false reality can become true. This is the crazy thing. Have you ever heard of what's known as the Tinkerbell effect?
Yeah, is it kind of once you think of something, it can occur?
Yeah, right. So it's an effect often associated with economics. The idea being that Tinkerbell, the character from Peter Pan, if you stop believing in fairies, a fairy dies. And therefore, there's an existential connection merely between belief and existence. That's what makes something exist, is that you just believe it. I believe that my bank account has my money in it. I know rationally that it does not because of fractional reserve banking. So if I try and take all of my money out of the bank account, I can. But if everyone tries, we won't be able to. We'll have things around the block. The banks will run out of money. There'll be a complete crash in the economy. And that's the Tinkerbell effect. So there's this huge sort of existential connection between mere belief and reality, which is just insanely interesting to me.
That is really interesting. And I never considered that point of view.
Anyway, so I thought your plan was, again, really good. But again, the structure, the way you went through your points could have been a little bit more closely connected to the hook word. Do you understand how you could do that?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. I think I just need to keep hammering better in, because if you don't, you can subconsciously just skew away from the question, and it doesn't matter how good your argument is. If it isn't the argument that if it isn't a question they're asking you, it just isn't good enough.
Yeah, right, exactly. And it allows you to deepen your analysis because you're breaking down words like better into multiple parts. Whereas many people will take better in quite a superficial way. You're really deepening your analysis there, which is great.